freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me, and before I be a slave.
Hello, I'm Minister Jason Turner, and this is a New Hope Baptist Church educational series titled Black Heroes of Faith in American History, where we take a look at some of the most influential Black leaders in American history during this month of February, in which we have set aside as Black History Month. Each week, we will take a look at 3 heroic men and women from the past that have endured hardship, oppression, physical abuse, and even death at the hands of those whose very mission it was to break the spirit of every Black man, woman, and child and force them to succumb to a system of bigoted control over anyone who did not look like them. So join us each week as we highlight these heroes who, through God's help and incredible faith, have paved the way for a better future for Black Americans and other oppressed people of color in this nation and abroad. Today's Black hero of faith in American history is Nelson Mandela. Mandela was born July 18, 1918 in Mevizo, South Africa, and died December 5th, 2013 in Johannesburg, South Africa. And he was a Black nationalist and the first Black president of South Africa from 1994 to 1999. His negotiations in the early 1990s with South African President F.W.D. de Klerk helped the country's apartheid system, and it ended the apartheid system of racial segregation and ushered in a peaceful transition to majority rule. Mandela and de Klerk were jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for Peace in 1993 for their efforts. Nelson Mandela was the son of Chief Henry Mandela of the Medgar clan of the Timbu people. And after his father's death, young Nelson was raised by the regent of the Timbu. Nelson renounced his claim as the chieftainship to become a lawyer, and he attended the South African Native College and got his law degree and studied law at the University of Witwatersrand. He later passed the qualification exam to become a lawyer, and in 1944 he joined the African National Congress, the ANC, a Black liberation group, and became a leader of its youth league. And in 1952 in Johannesburg, with fellow ANC leader Oliver Tambo, Mandela established South Africa's first Black law practice, specializing in cases resulting from the post-1948 apartheid legislation. Also that year, Mandela played an important role in launching a campaign of defiance against South Africa's pass laws, which required non-whites to carry documents known as passes, pass books, or reference books, authorizing their presence in areas that the government deemed restricted. So here he is, a Black man, having to show pass books or passes to walk around in his own country. And these restrictions were laid on the Black people by whites. After the massacre of unarmed Black South Africans by police forces at Sharpeville in 1960 and subsequent banning of the ANC, Mandela abandoned his nonviolent stance and began advocating acts of sabotage against the South African regime. He went underground and was one of the founders of the Umkhonto we Sizwe, or the Spear of the Nation, the military wing of the ANC. And in 1962, he went to Algeria for training in guerrilla warfare and sabotage, returning to South Africa later that year. On August 5th, shortly after his return, Mandela was arrested at a roadblock in Natal. And on October 1963, the imprisoned Mandela and several other men were tried for sabotage, treason, and violent conspiracy. Mandela was sentenced to life in prison and nearly escaped a death sentence. Throughout his incarceration, Mandela retained wide support amongst South African blacks in the South African black population. On February 11, 1990, the South African government under President de Klerk released Mandela from prison, and shortly after his release, Mandela was chosen deputy president of the ANC, and he became president of the party in July 1991. Mandela led the ANC in negotiations with de Klerk to end apartheid and bring about a peaceful transition to non-racial democracy in South Africa. In April 1994, the Mandela-led ANC won South Africa's first elections by universal suffrage, and on May 10th, Mandela was sworn in as the president of the country's first multi-ethnic government. He established in 1995 the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or the TRC, which investigated human rights violations under apartheid. And in 1996, he oversaw the enactment of a new democratic constitution. Nelson Mandela died December 5th, 2013, but his commitment to fighting for justice saw the end of apartheid in South Africa, and July 18th is now observed as International Mandela Day. Our next black hero of faith is Harriet Tubman. Known as the Moses of her people, Harriet Tubman was enslaved and escaped and helped others gain their freedom as a conductor of the Underground Railroad. Tubman also served as a scout, spy, guerrilla soldier, and nurse for the Union Army during the Civil War. She is considered the first African American woman to serve in the U.S. military. Tubman's exact birthday is unknown, but estimates place it between 1820 and 1822 in Dorchester County, Maryland. Born Araminta Ross, the daughter of Harriet Green and Benjamin Ross, Tubman had 8 siblings. By age 5, Tubman's owners rented her out to neighbors as a domestic servant. Early signs of her resistance to slavery and its abuses came at age 12, when she intervened to keep her master from beating an enslaved man who tried to escape. She was hit in the head with a 2-pound weight, leaving her with a lifetime of severe headaches and narcolepsy. Although enslaved Africans were not legally allowed to marry, Tubman entered a martial union with John Tubman, a free black man, in 1844. She took his name and dubbed herself Harriet. Contrary to legend, Tubman did not create the Underground Railroad. It was established in the late 18th century by black and white abolitionists. Tubman likely benefited from this network of escape routes and safe houses in 1849 when she and 2 brothers escaped north. Her husband refused to join her, and by 1851, he had married a free black woman. Tubman returned to the South several times and helped dozens of people escape. Her success led slave owners to post a $40,000 reward for her capture or death, but Tubman was never caught and never lost a passenger. Through the Underground Railroad, Tubman learned the towns and the transportation routes in the South, information that made her valuable to Union military commanders during the Civil War. As a Union spy and scout, Tubman often transformed herself into an aging woman, and she would wander the streets under Confederate control and learn from the enslaved population about Confederate troop placements and supply lines. Tubman helped many of these individuals find food, shelter, and even jobs in the North. As a nurse, Tubman dispensed herbal remedies to black and white soldiers dying from infection and disease. After the war, Tubman raised funds to aid freedmen, joined Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony in their quest for women's suffrage, cared for her aging parents, and worked with white writer Sarah Bradford on her autobiography as a potential source of income. And after an extensive campaign for military pension, she was finally awarded $8 per month in 1895, which is equivalent to $249 today. In 1896, she established the Harriet Tubman Home for the Aged on land near her home. Tubman died in 1913 and was buried with military honors at Fort Hill Cemetery in Auburn, New York. One quote from Harriet Tubman is, "And I prayed to God to make me strong and able to fight. And that's what I've always prayed for ever since. God's time is always near. He set the North Star in the heavens. He gave me the strength in my limbs, and he meant that I should be free." Today's Black hero of faith in American history is Medgar Evers. And on June 12, 1963, World War II veteran Medgar Evers was murdered in the driveway outside his home in Jackson, Mississippi. As a field worker for the NAACP, Evers had traveled through his home state, encouraging Africans to register to vote. He was instrumental in getting witnesses and evidence for the Emmett Till murder case and others, which brought national attention to the terrorism used against African Americans. Between 1952 and 1963, Medgar Evers was one of Mississippi's most impassioned activists, orators, and visionaries for change. He fought for equality and fought against brutality. Born July 2nd, 1925 in Decatur, Mississippi, Medgar was one of 4 children born to James and Jessie Evers. His father worked in a sawmill and his mother was a laundress. Evers' childhood was typical in many ways of black youths who grew up in the Jim Crow South during the Great Depression of the 1930s and the years preceding World War II. As a youth, Evers' parents showered him with love and affection, taught him family values, and routinely disciplined him when needed. The Evers home emphasized education, religion, and hard work. At about age 14, Evers observed to his horror the dragging of a black man, Willie Tingle, behind a wagon through the streets of Decatur. Tingle was later shot and hanged. A friend of Evers' father, Tingle was accused of insulting a white woman. Evers later recalled that Tingle's bloody clothes remained in the field for months near the tree where he was hanged. Each day on his way to school, Evers had to pass this horrific scene of violence, and he never forgot the image. At the end of his sophomore year in high school and several months before his 18th birthday, Evers volunteered and was inducted into the United States Army in 1942. During his tour of duty in World War II, Evers was assigned to and served with a segregated port battalion, first in Great Britain and later in France. Though typical at the time, racial segregation in the military only served to anger Evers. In 1950, Medgar and his brother Charles moved and settled in Philadelphia, Mississippi, and engaged in various business pursuits. Medgar was an insurance salesman, and Charles operated a restaurant, a gas station, and other enterprises. And at the time, he began organizing local affiliates of the NAACP. They worked quietly at first, slowly building up a base of support. And in 1954, Medgar moved to Jackson to become the NAACP's first field secretary in Mississippi. He traveled throughout the state recruiting members and organizing voter registration drives and economic boycotts. On June 12, 1963, a few hours after President John F. Kennedy had made an extraordinary broadcast to the nation on the subject of civil rights, Medgar Evers was shot and killed in an ambush in front of his home. The murder made Evers, until then a hardworking and effective but relatively obscure figure outside of Mississippi, a nationally known figure. He was buried with full military honors in Arlington National Cemetery and awarded the 1963 Spingarn Medal from the NAACP. His vision for freedom and his amazing strength and faith in God for all of his help is an inspiration to all of us. We thank you, Medgar Evers.